this is just like a, a summary of a sort of notions of one person's interaction with the other, or of a sort, our obligations when it comes to the other, or other people, other beings like myself. There is tons and tons of works on this very subject, which has to do with not only our experience of the other, but our obligation to the other, and how we should live with the other, and what we should be doing. There is very good resources with respect to how we experience the other, and that we do find that in phenomenology and existentialism. Jean-Paul Sartre does that. Edmund Husserl does that in his Cartesian Meditations. That is one that I find particularly interesting. So, the way I would prefer to, the way I would prefer to discuss on how we should experience the other and how we should interact with the other, would be primarily with a prescription of virtue ethics, but based on notions of Husserl's idea of how we experience the other in his Cartesian Meditations, but also by this book. There is various other resources on within phenomenology and existentialism on how we experience the other and how we should live with the other. For instance, we do have here we go. This is Being Singular Plural by Jean-Luc Nancy. That's one. There's various others. There's Emmanuel Levinas, which is The Being for the Other. Jacques Derrida on hospitality, and there's various others. And then there's also a different area on which has to do with language with respect to this very issue. There's works on on the actual interaction with respect to language. So it's very, very wide, and it's pretty much, you have this wide area of on works within phenomenology and existentialism, and also to post-structuralism on not only the self but the other as well, how we experience this other, language with respect to how we experience the other and how we live with the other, and our obligations to the other, and even further, the self, and is the self prior to the other, and such things like that. This book is Werner Marx's Towards a Phenomenological Ethics, the Ethos in the Life World. This is one of my favorite books. It touches on Husserl and Heidegger a lot, so that is why I really like it. Now, if I was going to try and use it, like I said, if I was going to try and think of a sort of prescription of ethics on how we are to interact with this other, it would be Husserl's description in the fifth meditation of the Cartesian Meditations on how we interact with the other, and how we interact with the other, like the sphere of oneness, and also the associative pairing, apperception, and to the intermagnetic community and intersubjectivity and such. That is where I would choose to go as to how to explain our experience with the other, with some touches, with like kind of breaking down this Husserl's kind of idea of the sphere of oneness. I mean, I would kind of lean. I would use Husserl's process on how we do this, but leaning more towards Heidegger's idea of, you know, the self in the world, the Sein in the world, and the being in the world and such. But then this here is, this here pretty much explains the interactions. It explains the vulnerability and mortality of the self, and how we understand that, how I understand that I have that in common with you as well as others, and how we can kind of have relations in sort of that way. And in this book, he's sort of making ethics based on the phenomenology of yeah, pretty much this is a good description of how we understand each other, and how this kind of empathy thing works. So it would be these two things, the Marxist-Husserlian kind of idea, along with some form of virtue ethics and some kind of form of prescription on the virtue ethics side. So it would be that way. Because I think that if we're going to explain the self's interaction with the other, then there has to be some kind of prescription of ethics on how we should live with this other. So pretty much what I'm trying to get the gist of is what Thich Nhat Hanh would call interbeing. Nhat Hanh has a lot of books like The Miracle of Mindfulness and the Zen Keys, as well as various others, which are very good books. He does talk a lot of he does use this word called interbeing, which is our life in our relation to others, to this other. So this is pretty much what I'm trying to understand here. Not only how we experience this other, how we gain certain notions of empathy, or how I can get into this other person's shoes. Now, Marx talks about this, that the way that we get this empathy. Empathy is pretty much how is me understanding you or the other as if I was in the other's shoes. So that would be by means of the fact that I am mortal, the other is mortal, and we have that in common. That's how we get this connection of empathy. And like Husserl says, that we have this monad, and that's where self is mirrored. We get this mirroring, I guess. So I'm trying to get the gist of this idea of interbeing. Nhat Hanh says that this interbeing is our relation of the self to the other. So the components of this is not only how we experience the other, how we get these notions of empathy, and how we get this link between the self and the other. The question as to which is prior, and what duties the self has to the other, and what duties or what obligations the self has to the other. We have to have some kind of ethical prescription as to what am I obligated to do when it comes to the other. And like I said, there's various resources on this very subject of what Nhat Hanh calls interbeing. We have Levinas, Jean-Luc Nancy, Derrida, Werner Marx, and then even Edmund Husserl, Jean-Paul Sartre, and even Martin Heidegger. So we had this big resources. So pretty much, I think that we all have to get a certain sort of, not only a certain sort of idea of how one experiences the other, which is prior, and what the self is obligated to do with respect to the other. So these are the questions of this interbeing, and this is very important, I think. What is most important, I think, is this obligations of what the self is, or of what the self has to this other, and this could involve the self not being prior to other, and other being prior to the self. There's lots of videos on YouTube, even about this. So these are these questions. So let me know what your thoughts are. I guess my question is, what kind of ethical prescription would you use, and specifically some kind of ethical prescription which would not only explain what the self is obligated to do, following the experience of the other, and how in mapping out this community, or mapping out this world, because I think the ethical prescription is obviously grounded on how this world is mapped out. Personally, I would use the way Heidegger maps out. Personally, I would use the way that Martin Heidegger has mapped out everything in this book, as well as Being in Time. That's what I would use to, because I think that this prescription of how the self is obligated to do certain things with the other and for the other, there has to be some kind of mapping out of the world and the self and the other in this world. We would have to map that out to ground this prescription. So personally, I would use what Heidegger says more than Husserl, even though I think that Husserl's process of experiencing the other is really important and should be kind of used. But I just don't agree with Husserl's idea of how this world is mapped out between the self and the other and the community around it. I'd much rather use convenient ideas of design, which Marx uses in this book. So this pretty much, I think, would be the manual on interbeing. But that's just me. Let me know what you think. If any of you read this, I think this is probably one of the lesser read books on this subject of interbeing, but in my opinion, this is the best manual. So let me know what you guys think, or if you have found a different one, if you like Levinas or Derrida or Jean-Luc Nazi or Sartre or whatever. Let me know what you like, or let me know what you think is the better way to go for not only a prescription but for mapping all this world out. But for me, this is it.